Welcome to Leadership Matters, a podcast from the Bailey Group. I'm your host, Kaylee Thomsen, president of and partner at the Bailey Group, where we believe better leaders create healthier workplace environments, healthier humans, and a better world. On this show, we explore real stories, practical insights, and honest conversations to help you lead yourself and others better. Thanks for joining us. Let's dive in. Welcome back to Leadership Matters. I'm your host, Kaylee Thomsen, and today I'm joined by Glen Gunderson. Glen is president and CEO of YMCA of the North. Glen's work sits right at the intersection of purpose-driven leadership, whole person well-being, and building community in an increasingly fragmented and disconnected world. Glen, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks so much for being here today.
Grateful.
So, by all accounts, you've had a very successful career. I would love to hear about some of the defining moments that have shaped how you think about leadership.
No, thank you. Thanks for having me. I'm very impressed with your content and what you're trying to get done with leadership. I think leadership is an art and it's a science, and we have to be open to learning. I have had a long career now, 35 years working post-college, and that I would say probably some of the most important lessons have come from mentors. And I always encourage leaders, where are you relative to your internal mentors, maybe inside of the organization where you work, and where are you with those mentors from the outside that might not have the same blinders on, might have really unique perspective. And I had a number of crucibles in my leadership journey. Early on, working for a health and fitness kind of health club company, really started to feel a pull away from my own values. The company had been sold. It started to think differently about how it was serving its team members and its members. And that was probably my first inflection to say I could feel that tension between who I wanted to be as a human and who I wanted to be as a leader and what was being asked of me. And had this amazing opportunity to go to Lifetime in its early days. I think we had 3 or 4 facilities open at the time, and Lifetime is now a bit of a local legendary story, right, that has become a national brand. And when I went to Lifetime initially, I was charged with leading a business development function, kind of helping expand beyond kind of the consumer side of life and start to work with health plans and companies and other kind of commercial buyers, if you will, of well-being. And what I learned there is, hang on. I mean, the pace was insane. We had a decade of 35% plus EBITDA growth. We had, every day our job was bigger than we probably deserved to be in, each of us as leaders. And it took its toll too, like the pace, the hours. And the inflection there was really wanting to become a stronger kind of business leader versus a stronger creative. I had an inflection point in my career there where I think the company wanted me to be a creative, and I wanted to learn how to be a better leader more broadly, and learned a ton from both the peers in that organization, the founder of that organization, who's an indomitable spirit and super dynamic leader. And also loved this notion of being in a company where the purpose was so clearly trying to move people forward in well-being. I always try to talk to leaders about crucibles, like how do you take account of the failures or those moments where you're really put back on your heels or you feel like you haven't delivered what you want to deliver, and what have you learned from it? How do you retool? How do you retune? How do you, become vulnerable enough to grow through those moments? And I've had plenty.
What have you learned about embracing the vulnerability in those moments for yourself personally, Glen?
It's interesting. I think in the first decade of professional life, it's very hard for leaders to be vulnerable. Now, I think this is going to change because young people, this next generation, I think alpha and beta in particular, are going to be far more likely to be empaths, also self-driven maybe because of the technology tools in their pocket, but I think they have the potential to be more empathetic earlier in their career, and they're expecting something much different from their employer. For me, it took me a decade or so to recognize that this wasn't about putting on a show. It wasn't about hiding behind masks. It was, how do you bring your whole self to work?
Yeah.
How do you bring Everything, whether it be your faith position, your, how your family values intersect with your work values. And I think the sooner that leaders can figure that out,
Mm.
the more they're going to find a sense of well-being and connection to their work in a much broader sense, a much more purpose-driven sense.
Can you share an example of where you've seen that really have impact, where people are bringing their whole selves?
I'll use the example of the YMCA right now. We're in the throes of moving the organization from what I would think some people perceive the Y to be commoditized swim and gym. And while those are the basis of some of the things we do, they're not why we do it. And so the Y has really been investing now in whole person and whole community well-being. And what I've recognized in talking to Y leaders around the country, my own direct, the leaders that I serve directly within the Y, and CEOs outside, Fortune 500 CEOs, CEOs from all sizes of companies, it's very interesting to hear how much we are shifting to focus on the well-being of our people. That it used to be that you could get away with more autocratic leadership, more dictatorial leadership. It maybe never felt good to the recipient. Maybe it never felt real fulfilling for the dictator either. But now I think in serving what is now 5, 6 generations that all are distinct in their digital nativity, all distinct in how they consider blending work with their broader life. I think we really have to focus on a sense of well-being and belonging in workplace. What are we doing to advance or at least equip and enable well-being? I don't think that companies were counted on to play that role 20 and 30 and 40 years ago. Now I think it's a rather indispensable position for organizations. Like I actually wake up today thinking as much about the well-being and kind of the balance and the belonging aspects of our team members as I do the financials, and that is different. And part of it is I'm just seeing these trends of the mental health tsunami, the folks feeling very unsettled, the affordability challenges that our families have. They are bringing a lot to work, and we can't expect not to acknowledge that and to help figure out how to support them in putting those things in the right places.
Mm. You talk about the nature of leading across 6 different generations, and when I
Yeah.
think about the why, I think about everything from infant
Oh
care
yeah.
all the way up. How do you I mean, I can tell that you've got an insatiable curiosity for what's going on in the marketplace
Yeah.
and the needs and psychographics of the demographics you're serving, but how do you think about impact across all these differences?
Yeah. It's mind bending, actually. I honestly think that one of the most challenging aspects of serving in the Y is a marketing challenge of like, we don't have a very, very tightly defined customer set, right?
Mhm.
To your point, we serve infants, we serve 100-year-old members,
Mhm.
we serve everybody in between. And by the way, our workforce stretches from 90 down to now 13, 14 leadership or leaders in training
Yeah.
within our camp infrastructure. So, what is distinct about each of those generations? I know sometimes we put too much stock in it, but I can tell you my adult kids, 21 and 23, their first language might very well be digital. It's not my first language, right? And it's certainly not the first language of my parents, whose age group might be volunteers at the Y. So how do we think about instrumenting work life values that are ubiquitous, and also then take into account the distinct, the wisdom perhaps of the boomers, and maybe they're not going to be as inclined to leverage AI, but they're going to have such sage advice. I was just with our legacy board today. That group is aged between the mid 70s and the early 80s. Well, they're not going to probably lead the band on where we should go with AI, but history repeats. And the wisdom they have around other inflection points in history is an amazing value to our leadership team. So part of it is finding what does each generation bring that is unique, that makes a stronger whole. And sometimes you have to slow down and really listen to understand what are those things. And at the same time, equip our team to understand that we'll never operate as slowly as we're operating right now. I think that's daunting, right? Technology is moving us every day a little bit faster. So how do we leverage tools to be able to distill that at a pace that we can stand?
How are you thinking about AI, Glenn?
Yeah.
And I love that comment about we are moving at the slowest pace we ever will.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, think about that. This is an age where and I think about this a lot. In my vision around AI, we're not interested in replacing team members. We are interested in making team members more effective in serving community. Can they, use agentic AI to have 24/7 analysts helping them understand consumer challenges, understand, perhaps social impact issues in our community more clearly so that they can program an instrument against those and really, really have a bigger impact. I think it's going to be an indispensable reality. It is interesting because depending on the generation, it cuts wildly differently. I have a 23-year-old daughter who's entering medical school here this summer. She's not real excited about AI in the sense of what it's doing, what that data development is doing to the environment.
Huh.
And at the same time, it's going to change medicine in a big way, right? There are going to be tools there that she'll be able to leverage to be a much better practitioner. So the way we're thinking about it internally is how do we make our team members more effectively? How do we address some of the administrative things that take us away from direct service to community? What are the ways that we can leverage it to educate our young people around AI for good? So I think the Y can take this position of it's going to be a tsunami, a steamroll. We're going to see it ingratiate itself in every corner of our living. So then how do we get after educating young people to say, if this is going to be core to you, let's make sure you have the tools to be successful, maybe to have an edge as you enter the workforce, but then also how are you predisposed as a young leader to think about using AI for good, for advancing community well-being, for advancing, housing stability, food insecurity, whatever the case.
Yeah. Wow. One of the things that I really appreciate you talking about is this move from being known as the Y for swimming and
Yeah.
gym to this focus around whole person well-being. And I
Yeah.
heard you also say whole community
Yeah.
well-being.
Yeah.
How practically can organizations like the Y or organizations who do want to make the world a better place, as I know you and your team are on a mission to do so, how can we do that in today's world?
Yeah. Well, again, the pace of change is challenging. It's creating more and more stress. So the way I've been thinking about it is we have to not only brand the why distinctly, we have to instrument and program it distinctly too. It is right now. In fact, I just coming out of our corporate office earlier today, our association office, and ran into one of our practitioners around sound healing and sound bowls. Well, that's not something the Y did 10 years ago. This is new age in some ways programming that allows people to take a deep breath, take a huge step back, leverage other modalities to work on their well-being. To me, it's a bit of an East meets West philosophy. It's a global move toward there are lots of ways for us to address stress. It might be prayer or a faith position. It might be taking more of a well-being oriented set of classes that can allow us to breathe a little deeper, to go and get out of our own heads and think more broadly about where we really sit in the world and in community. So part of it is us shifting programming. We have aligned now with the largest 16 YMCAs around the country. Very excited about this effort, calling it a community well-being network. Those Ys now sharing investment. So, think about communities like New York, Houston, Chicago, Atlanta, LA, Seattle, San Diego, where the largest associations are in the country. These leaders are responsible for the well-being of lots and lots of folks. And if we were to, work together on integrating AI investments, digital and engagement tools more effectively, maybe share resources around clinical roles or practical roles that are more closely aligned with the health system. If we had the ability to share investment around partnering with the providers, the hospitals, the clinics, the payers, we might be able to move the needle. And I think there's a emerging sense that the Y, being in 10,000 communities, but now also having a digital solution capability, that we might just be the antidote to a broken health system, that 83% of the U.S. population lives within 10 minutes of a Y. That's an amazing thing, right? The top 25 Ys serve half of the U.S. population, and the Y is a global instrument as well, with operations in 130 countries. So we have an opportunity, I think, to progress from what has been a focus around connected communities to whole person and whole community. Our roots are in spirit, mind, body, wrapped in community. And all we're really doing is going back to the future, like taking some of those roots and building on top with more digital sensitivities and sensibilities and more capability around programming inside and out. We've always been a place-based organization. And we're celebrating 170 years here in Minnesota, 175 years in the U.S. In this year, 2026. But place-based organizations aren't going to be enough in the future. We're going to have to figure out how to blend platform and place. How do we show up outside of our four walls? How do we show up in your pocket? How do we show up in your other community hangs, the other third places where you might exist, to wrap services and wrap capability around? And I think ultimately the Y is in a really good position to be an antidote to a broken system and bring some hope. Bring hope both at the well-being level, but in a social impact sense too.
Yeah. What an inspiring vision.
We'll see how it goes.
You used the word third places. And I know in previous conversations we've talked about sort of the decrease in third places. How do you view the future of third places?
Yeah. Well, I think if you look back, we've really lost a sense of community grounding. We don't see, although we're seeing some really interesting trends right now with the Catholic Church growing and other religious institutions starting to grow again, but we have kind of lost this rhythm. I think in part because while we're super connected digitally, as we talked about earlier, we're not as connected today as we have ever been. It's a real challenge for humans to sit next to humans and actually have a real conversation and be, doing so without being distracted every second or every alert on your phone, whatever, that kind of disrupts that flow and that rhythm. So to me, place is important. And I think the Y is one of the last places where all generations come together and where all backgrounds come together, socioeconomic, religious affiliation, ethnic backgrounds. In Blaisdell Y, South Minneapolis, very close to where the shootings took place during Metro Surge, this is a place where 50 languages are spoken within a mile. It's unbelievably rich in its, diverse heritage, and we're serving kids from every part of the world, right? Our new American welcome efforts and all the ways in which we're, really looking at humans versus humans categorized in a weaponized or political sense. And so I'm really encouraged by the Y's ability to break these patterns of not coming together, or if we come together, coming together where we're the most comfortable, where everybody might look like us and might be about our same age, might have come from the same background. I think the only way, as a nation, we truly break through and have community again is that we've got to somehow put the political divide aside, and we have to see each other again as human beings, as unique creations. What is it that we can draw together on versus continue to create the division? And, the news media is not going to help us. That's now 24/7 editorial. We can argue it's not news. We're not finding truth. And if we're finding it, we're finding what we want to hear because the algorithm will just feed us, a Fox or a CNN or a MSNBC news track that happens to fit the way in which we've been searching for the last 10 years. So we have to somehow intervene with intergenerational work, with programming that is relevant to age groups, that has a mix of place and platform. And ultimately, I do think love and service will win out here.
And that's been such a through line in your work as well. I mean, I'm just struck by that. How would you describe your leadership style, Glenn?
Well, I think it's really evolved. I mean, like I said earlier, I think when you're young, impetuous, and also more insecure as a leader, I think all kinds of bad behavior comes out. You really haven't developed your, you know, purpose necessarily in the earliest parts of your careers. You're maybe still trying to find what is it that resonates with me, that motivates me, that brings me joy. I always talk about to young leaders about, find first what you love to do and then figure out how to get paid for it. And that's not always easy early. Sometimes you just have to pay dues. But I encourage leaders now, and I think this alpha generation is going to set a new high bar for us in terms of really being themselves at work. So I would say my leadership's evolved a ton. I would describe it now as purpose-centered and servant leadership. I love inverting hierarchy. I love taking kind of titles down and really focusing on what can leaders bring to the table and how can we draw as much out and give them as much responsibility as early as we can. I love empowering teams to say, hey, it's okay to fail. We used to talk in terms of fail fast. We talk more in terms of learn fast now, but making failure okay at the same time. If you try something that doesn't work, it's not going to submarine the organization. But you're going to learn from it, and the next thing you launch will be that much more effective. So to me, servant leadership is, putting the enterprise above your own self-interest, putting the people above your interest, and really finding ways to hire leaders that are way beyond your own capability in given functions. Get that functional expertise and then help that functional expert understand that their job really is an enterprise role. It is, we're talking a lot right now about the notion of first team. Who is your first team? And at the Y, we're really trying to help the leaders that I serve directly understand that the executive team, the senior most team, that is your first team if you sit on that team. You've got to guard it, protect it, serve it, and help it improve its resonance and its relevance for the rest of the group. And so I'm really enjoying this journey of continuing to evolve what purpose means. I talk to leaders now about, don't set a date for retirement. Don't even set the idea around retirement. Why don't you set an intention around how does my purpose just evolve so that I'm always pursuing purpose, whether it's in a volunteer sense at my 80th year or whether it's in my first job out of college. How am I pursuing purpose? And, the values around being able to slow down eventually will show up. But I think if we're focused on serving others, we won't feel like we're working as much. It'll take its toll and it'll feel heavy. And like I'm carrying burdens today, there's no doubt. But at the end of the day, I think the fulfillment of somebody's life will be much different if they're focused on purpose versus accumulating so that they can retire.
How would you articulate your evolving purpose as it sits today?
Well, I've been really fortunate to work in organizations who have had pretty clear purposes around helping move humans forward. So to me, my purpose is clear. I want to help people be healthy and I want to help leaders thrive. I enjoy more than anything helping leaders kind of see something bigger in themselves or in their team than they believed they could see before. And so painting bigger pictures, bigger visions, and then helping that leader see themselves in it is something that I love doing.
What does leadership require today that maybe it didn't 10 or 20 years ago?
In the past, you had one generation leading another generation. Now you have one generation, as we talked about earlier, leading several generations. You had traditional norms, right? In many ways, you had white men leading companies, right? And you had them leading in a way that was more top-down. And you had professional management was, I'm going to tell you what to do, and you're going to go do it. And that worked at a pace of change in the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, maybe even in the 90s, where technology wasn't driving as much democratization of information, wasn't creating access to data that we have now, wasn't necessarily needing to leverage other skills underneath. And I think the other piece is that information travels so fast now that my son at 21 can be an AI expert long before I will be. So somehow I have to unlock that inside of our organization, right? So because access to information is what it is, I think because leaders can also bring kind of these micro-generational instincts, I think now you have to really flatten organizations in a different way. You have to raise voices from every level of the organization. You have to have people feeling a sense of ownership, that it's not them serving or in a subservient position to a leader, but that they're in a partnership or a mission partnership with their supervisor or their leader, and that the leader needs to be more a partner and less an autocrat. I think this shift is making some of that old school leadership somewhat obsolete. There are still leaders preaching. There's a professor at Stanford that still preaches on power dynamics as a really interesting way to lead. I will say, our kind of business Bible on leadership has really spun out of Bill George and True North and Authentic Leadership. He remains engaged with our organization. He's a board member. He's a philanthropist, along with his wife, Penny, investing in community well-being. And one of the gifts he's given us is this notion of True North and Authentic Leadership, that you can pursue purpose without being a command and control leader. And I think you look around the world, look at the countries where we're not in a war-torn environment or in a strained environment. We have more women leading nations now, and we're not getting into battle, right? We're having more empathetic, more sensitive leadership styles. And I think the more we democratize access to the bigger roles or the biggest roles, and we give those roles to people who are seeing the humanity in their leadership team, we're going to be much more effective. And we're going to be able to have sustained culture as a result. So to me, it's, you said it in the title, like human-centered leadership. Putting the human at the center. If you do that, you'll lead differently, as opposed to the inanimate process you're trying to perfect or the product you're trying to shove out the door. If you put the human at the center, I think the results, I've seen it in my own experience, when you empower young leaders and you give them some tools and you give them some confidence and you let them learn fast, failure's okay, the results can be demonstrably better than an old school top-down leader might deliver.
Were there any moments in your leadership journey, Glenn, when you struggled to trust in the concept of human-centered leadership?
Yeah, I think any leader feels like their instincts are good, right? And I always try to encourage leaders to say, think hard about the times when your instinct, you went against your instinct and it ended up being the right decision. Generally speaking, I tend to think 70, 80% of the time, our instinct is the direction we should take. I feel good and strong about my own instincts. And I've had 35 years practicing those and failing plenty. But so part of it for me is sometimes knowing, I might know the answer because I've seen that same movie before, but still letting the leader progress through and maybe learn through, like not overwhelming or coming over the top with my own perspective, because as a matter of fact, their instinct might end up winning the day. It might be a better direction after all. So I think for leaders, the longer you're leading and the more experiences you've had, it sometimes is hard, to take a step back and just let that younger leader find their way. So I'm constantly testing myself on that.
I love that. As we sit here in 2026, what are some of the challenges keeping you up at night?
Yeah. Well, I talked about the well-being of our people and the well-being of community. We have this K-shaped economy. We have a wealth gap that's really growing. We have some people doing great, and we have a lot of our families and our young people that are not. So education gaps keep me up. We have to do a better job with math and reading and some of these technology skills for our young people. There are places in our community, and I wouldn't have recognized this not having worked at the Y. When I worked at Lifetime, I could commute on the western edge of Hennepin County. I could drive by a bunch of gated communities, and it looked like everybody was doing great. And it wasn't until I came to the Y that I really recognized how many of our families aren't doing so great. and the cost of healthcare, the affordability dynamics. I filled up my own tank yesterday and took a gasp, right? There are a lot of challenges around food security, around housing instability, or even access to housing. It's much more expensive for young people to get started today than it was for me and for people in my generation. So we have big systemic issues to solve. And we have a political environment that is so divided that we're incapable of coming together, crossing aisle and shaking hands and being seen together, even though our political position might be different. Those things do keep me up at night. There are other things leading a why. We have thousands of kids at camp. We have, our wilderness camping, which is an incredible leadership development opportunity where we'll have young people up into the Arctic Circle for 45 days this summer, or they'll go out to the Bighorn Mountains and they'll be with just a counselor or two for half of the summer. Those things keep me up at night sometimes when a big windstorm or lightning comes through. So I keep tabs of weather broadly, a little more so in the summer than I do in the winter. But I think it's, we need leaders, whether it's in the Y, whether it's in community, whether it's here in Robbinsdale, whether it's across our state and our nation and the world, that are focused on humans. And, this notion of humankind, human and kind, how do we pull those together for once? It's been, I think about my kids, 21 and 23, their whole life, they've only seen political madness. They haven't seen adults coming together to solve big problems. And I think it's time for us to do that.
What do you think the biggest barriers are for us coming together and doing that?
The mental health of our society is a real thing. We're, and the pace of change is a challenge. I think those are getting in the way. I think we've drifted maybe from some of the faith foundations or other values-based foundations that really matter. The thing we talked about earlier around connectedness, okay, we can connect any moment via Snap or Instagram or text, but am I really seeing what you're going through? Am I there for you? Am I listening? Do I have the time to actually be present? We talk in the Y about being where our feet are, especially in a camp sense. Like, how do we teach young people and adults, for that matter, to be where their feet are? And I think that is a ever-increasing challenge for our society. And I do think there's going to be a reckoning. I think the alpha generation and beta are not going to stand for it. I think they will have lived through things they've seen in a political sphere and in a geopolitical and a social impact sphere that they're not going to put up with. And I think I have a lot of hope that they will lead differently. I think the boomers and my generation X have probably been a little self-centered. And we have an opportunity now to focus on the whole of community again.
And you're leading some of that charge.
We've given it a shot. I think the Y is, an incredible organization. I would never have imagined working for the Y early in my career, and so glad I found it. I mean, it's a place where you really get to serve both internally and externally very broadly the needs of community. Most people don't know we have a Center for Social Impact that is working on all those social determinants or social drivers of health that we've kind of touched on throughout the conversation today. We have this Center for Youth Voice where we're teaching young people to be civically engaged in a civil way. Isn't that a good idea, right? Through youth in government, through Model United Nations, and bringing the next generation up in a way that will, I think, lead to some real social change.
You said earlier in your career you wouldn't have anticipated being with the Y.
Yeah.
Say more about that.
Yeah, it was interesting. Even when this opportunity came forward, I heard from the search firm and I turned it down. And I turned it down because I only knew the Y as a competitor in a fitness sense from my days at Lifetime. I had no concept for the breadth of the work it did in serving the community. So 2 weeks after I turned the search firm down, I got a call from a mentor. And he basically hit me upside the head and said, "What are you thinking? This is your community. This is what you've always talked about. The Y is going through a merger. You can help bring two teams into kind of a one team, one mission perspective. You got to take a look at this." So I remember apologetically calling the search firm again and saying, "I was just kidding. I'd like to learn about this opportunity. Tell me more." And what I didn't recognize is all the breadth. Like, I just saw the fitness component. I didn't see this wilderness tripping that's allowing young people to become so resilient and self-reliant. I didn't see the feeding and food programming. I didn't see stable homes, stable schools, where we're making sure young people are not only stable in their schools, but they're stably housed so that they can stay in that school versus hopping around to couch after couch or district to district. So, we do work around helping young women prevent the risk of being trafficked. I mean, that's unbelievable, right? Or young people who have been trafficked, giving them the tools to get themselves out. So, I think very few understand the full breadth and dimension of the why. And as I came to understand that, I realized, well, I probably should have been here for all time.
Oh, wow. Take us back to that time when you're having conversations with the search firm
Yeah.
and considering this role. How did you feel about stepping into such a big role?
Yeah, it was my first CEO job, right? So I had been a chief business officer for a venture-backed firm between Lifetime and the Y, but I hadn't run the whole thing. And so that was a daunting notion. In fact, when I was going back and forth in negotiating on the opportunity, my family and I were on spring break. My kids were 8 and 6. And I've told this story before, but my daughter and I were together when a job offer showed up. They FedExed it to where we were staying. And I thought, well, this will be a great teaching moment. I'm very engaged as a dad. And I said, all right, Sophia, you got to come with me. I'm going to share this with her and just pose my current option and my new option. And I did that. And I didn't know what to expect. And out of her mouth, she said, well, Dad, you're going to serve more people at the Y. So I think you should go to the Y. And she was right. It's back to that instinct. I'm not saying we should give the keys to 8-year-olds, but we do need to listen to our young people. They know what's really going on. And there were two things that I was concerned about when I was back and forth with the search committee. One was, is this going to be complex enough? I didn't know what operating a nonprofit would mean.
Sure.
And then would I be pigeonholed as a nonprofit leader? Because I'd been kind of this high growth, early stage leader in well-being. Yeah. And it was encouraging. I picked the brain of a few of the search committee members, and they said, well, you got to decide if you're going to go back to the private sector, you maybe can't stay forever because, yeah, you'll start to be known as a nonprofit person, which, frankly, I love at this stage in my career. And the complexity is beyond what I would have expected. Trying to learn the childcare business, the camp business, the philanthropy, the social impact, the reaching out to federal agencies for funding, plenty going on there. And to this day, I'm learning every day.
What was one of your biggest challenges stepping into that role in the first 90, 180 days?
Language was different, right? I was used to high growth and driving revenue and driving margin and driving in a business development sense. And so I recall, this language barrier that I struggled with a little bit. Like, boy, I got to really think about outreach and community impact. What is the net community impact on the work we're doing? We talk now a lot about return on impact versus return on, invested capital or something in the private sector. So that was a big learning for me. Also, the culture of selflessness and servanthood, like the inspiring stories everywhere throughout the Y of leaders that have been there 5, 10, 40, 50 years serving community and their commitment, knowing full well they might be able to make more elsewhere. They might be able to go into the private sector and have maybe a bigger title, but they stayed because they had really adopted this notion that purpose was going to be, the story for them. So that was a learning. I also learned, through some of great counsel from board members and board chairs that, I was, again, really built around growth. So I really felt like I needed to show we were growing. And there were a number of times when board leaders would say, hey, it's okay if you're not speaking to the business terms and you're, again, speaking to those social outreach and impact measures. And so I've learned a lot about what really matters in a nonprofit sense.
How difficult was that for you to switch gears so dramatically, Glenn?
Yeah, it was a soul-searching time. I remember the first few months having a number of commutes where I'd call my wife and say, I'm not sure, that I'm cut out for this, that maybe this is even bigger than what I can bring. And And so there's plenty of self-doubt early. It was important to build a team that had strong YMCA and nonprofit experience. I was inclined to bring outside leaders to meld with the inside leaders. And one of the most important decisions, which was prompted by a board member as well, was to bring a leader that was steeped in the why as a chief operating officer. We did that, and that made all the difference. I had a super strong filter and sounding board in a chief operating officer that allowed me to make sense of the place, but also to leverage my skills versus that individual's skills.
Sounds like a strong right-hand partner.
Indeed.
Getting up to speed.
Indeed.
Outstanding.
Yeah.
Glenn, as you think about where you're at right now and your life and leadership, what feels most important for you personally to contribute or pass on?
Thank you. Well, I said earlier a little bit about what drives me right now, and that is investing in leaders. I'm seeing so much goodness and so much talent and capability. I would say our Y leadership group right now is by far the strongest it's ever been, and it continues to get stronger. It's representing plenty of dimensions of diversity. It is in its individual forms and in its total form is so talented. And so I'm really loving this kind of season around investing in those leaders and imparting whatever I can and learning a ton from them too. I'm also enjoying, this is something that one of my mentors has brought to me, this idea of cultivating relationships in every decade. Some of that is, my own children and their friends. And as they're starting to emerge, coming out of school and becoming professionals, maintaining a connection with them and what's giving them hope and really getting hope from some of those stories. But cultivating, and I think this is important for all leaders, like what are you doing to not be stuck in your little zone? If you think about early life, our friends are peers in school, and then there are peers in college, and then there may be the folks that are about our age in our first job or two, and we kind of travel in that pack, and then they become the families that our kids are engaged with, right? And so what's true of that? Well, we're all about the same age, and maybe we're about in the same, kind of place in life. And I think there's beauty in that, but there's also a caution flag, which is how are we opening up our aperture? How are we getting out of tunneled vision? And I think one of the best ways to do that is to have relationships in every decade. So I have an 82 and 83-year-old parents who are indomitable mentors for me. One's espousing whatever you do serve. One is espousing whatever you do give. They've always been and consistently focused on those kinds of axioms and living in that humble and generous way. I've got an 83-year-old mentor who is really important to me from a business leadership development standpoint, and how do I become a better leader on purpose, and all the way down 60s, 70s. My faith group has guys in their upper 50s to close to 70. That group is so important to me in terms of the movies they've seen and what I can learn from them. And so I challenge leaders, like, how do you find these mentors across decades? And you can be mentored by a 20-something, and you can be mentored by an 80-something, and you're certainly imparting some wisdom too. So I guess what I'm loving most right now is serving leaders inside the Y, outside the Y, learning from leaders, exploring what my pursuit of purpose is supposed to look like for the next decade, be it serving the Y, serving other organizations, and how do I blend volunteer work in there as well, and find some time for family too.
I love it. My last question for you is a curious question. Your passion for whole person well-being is palpable. What are the pillars in your own life?
Well, it's interesting. I'm using AI right now as an agent for personal well-being, which has really been fun to play with. Like literally charging, ChatGPT to be my 24/7 analyst and agent on, prompting the right workouts and the right. So I have definitely shifted a little bit from more hardcore lifting and in more intense activities to more qigong, tai chi, trying to do some resilience kinds of things, breathing a little deeper, still doing some cardio and some lighter lifting. I don't move weight around as much as I once did or wish I could. And really trying to think more holistically. Like I'm, paying more attention to my sleep. I'm paying more attention to, trying to eat a little more cleanly. When you're traveling or when you're, working through these schedules, that's not always easy. So trying to be more intentional about that. Fasting a little bit, kind of windows of fasting a little bit more. I think there's a blessing and a curse around this quantified self. Like, we can measure stuff. And I think it also can inject more stress for folks. So I'm trying to use it more as a guide, trying to stay on a decent pattern of rest, a decent pattern of more mindfulness activities. And there's always something that's falling off a little. I was in a pattern for a while of doing a triathlon every year. I'd like to get back and do that, the shortest version that they'll host. But trying to, in my 20s and 30s, it was fitness, and certainly now it's more trying to think holistically about what's important for me at my age. When you wake up at my age, everything hurts, so you gotta keep moving for sure.
I love that. How do you manage stress, Glenn?
Yeah, mostly it's finding some window of time for myself. So it might be later in the evening with, like I say, either through Y360, our virtual product, or through some tool online to get some Tai Chi or yoga in, or a Qigong class, might be 12, 15 minutes. I use a sauna some as a half Finnish, half Norwegian person. I got to jump in a sauna once in a while. And then just making sure that every day I get some activity. So if I'm on the road, I kind of have a mandate for myself that I can't travel for work without budgeting some time for a long walk or a jog or time in a fitness center, just to try to keep it as a front and center piece.
How difficult has that been for you?
Oh, it's hard. Oh, yeah, it's hard.
Yeah.
It ebbs and flows, but I'm in a place now where I'm making it more a non-negotiable. And I think that helps because there's no doubt stress mounts. I'm a type A personality. I love to see progress on lots of things. And so it's important. And my wife is an incredible catalytic force for our family, and I think that one of the best mirrors too. She can see when I've pushed the envelope too far, and can be a wise and loving support to get me back on track.
That's awesome. Well, I think that's a perfect note to end on. Glenn, thank you so much for being here and imparting so much wisdom today.
Oh, it's a great pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Yes, and thank you to our listeners. Join us next week for another episode of Leadership Matters.
Thanks for joining us for today's episode of Leadership Matters. If today's episode resonated with you, would you do me a favor and share it with someone you care about? To learn more about the work the Bailey Group is doing in the world, check us out at thebaileygroup.com or follow us over on LinkedIn. We love sharing useful articles, helpful resources, and valuable tools to help you expand your leadership capacity. Like and subscribe, and join us next time for more honest conversations.